Something happened in 2017 that was heartbreaking to me. Ireland passed a law legalizing abortion. Ireland wasn't the only place where people who had a very significant history or cultural experience connected to Catholicism had taken steps to try to remonstrate that somehow legalized abortion was considered a woman's right or some sort of example of women's liberation. My understanding is that in the last couple of years, that Poland also is a place where there have been massive protests concerning the understanding some people have that abortion is about a woman's right to choose and preventing abortion or not sponsoring under the auspices of health treatment abortion options for women is a means of repressing women's freedoms. I'm somebody that had an abortion myself, and I have had to live for going on now 25 years with an understanding that I committed a grave sin. That at the time it occurred, I did it with an understanding that I was going to have my possibilities for social options, political options, material options, and economic options severely cut off, if not altogether eliminated, if I went through with having a child. I did not think I could get pregnant. My understanding is at the time I was actually not capable of being in a situation where I could get pregnant, but I did. And the social context I was in was completely different than the one I came from. And despite the fact that I personally believed that abortion was a sin, people I was with did not feel that way. And while they kept saying they supported my right to choose, they also made it very clear that if I made the wrong choice, they would not support that. I made a mistake. And I've paid for it. And in the course of this, what I've learned is I don't believe and I don't understand abortion to be actually about women's rights. I actually think it's the contrary. I think it is a grave problem that we have, specifically in the United States, that we masquerade that women's reproductive capacities are somehow merely about leveraging her life options as opposed to creating the material conditions to actually provide for the safety of motherhood and the safety of childhood. And I say it in this manner. Motherhood and childhood should be sacred. And even if you're a secular person, it should be something that our society focuses on as a priority and that all things tear to, allowing for it to be our priority. This is not to desanctify or reduce the significance of fatherhood. On the contrary, if we had a more appropriate relationship with the protections that are necessary for assuring that motherhood and childhood is protected, then fatherhood could be exalted and protected as well. This is not to challenge aspersions on traditional family models. I am somebody that traditionally, at least in my political reality, does not believe in the marriage contract as a civil right. Right? It's a property right. It's a contract. It can potentially be an expression of one's faith and religious preference. But our concepts of civil rights are very different when we have to deal with the actual reality of attempts to try to manipulate other civil rights we have or other constitutional rights we have and other processes and possibilities we have by reducing civil rights to something very simple and something that ultimately does not actually speak to the need we are seeking through various actions, including actions that involve something as important as taking the life of a child before it's allowed to be born and brought up in a safe society that's going to assure that it has access to equal opportunity. We're in a situation right now where millions of people around the world are dying. And the actual material conditions to prevent the proliferation of these deaths are not being engaged. Last year, last autumn, last summer, I watched a series of litigious actions go through the courts in the United States discussing teleabortion. Who should pay for it? And in what manner should it be considered a woman's right, a civil right, to have a teleabortion? The problem is, teleabortion is also somebody else's weapons paradigm. And this is what I have to deal with. My understanding is part of what is going on is that there are those who believe that certain people are owed restitution, including in the form of some sort of economy that involves genetic data. They want your blood. It's very simple. I wish they'd be more honest. They want our blood. They want our DNA. They already got my blood. They got my blood in 1996. But they also got the blood of my son's father. And this is a very significant matter that I've had to deal with ever since then. My understanding is when that fetus, as they called it, when my son was taken out of my body and put into some sort of identification as biological data or biological materials available for what ended up happening with that fetus, that it was used in connection with a number of experiments associated with the stage it was at. And I believe that I am one of perhaps a number of women, including scores of women that don't have any way to really talk about this honestly, that I'm somehow still connected to what ended up happening with the harvested DNA from the alleged, what they would call a fetus. Now, once they took the DNA and they used it for whatever they used it for, that in some way, spiritually, perhaps even psychically, I'm still connected to what they did with it, including people that were availed of the advantages of whatever it was that they created with that DNA. And I believe there might be other women who have a comparable experience, that at some point in their past, for whatever reason, they had an abortion, and what ended up happening is their DNA ended up getting harvested. And this is one of the reasons why it is specifically disturbing to me that Ireland legalized abortion. Because Irish DNA has been very, very highly sought after and on somebody's market very lucrative ever since the Good Friday Agreement. That they wanted specific kinds of DNA. That it was as if there was a premium on certain kinds of DNA to use for certain kinds of human test subject experimentation. And it has come to define entire ways of life for various communities. The specific engineering into being rendered accessible for harvesting and extraction of one's genetic materials in order to be a part of paradigms further down the pipeline in connection with previously harvested DNA and what it was used for. The nation of Ireland has had a lot it has had to deal with since the Good Friday Agreement. Part of that has been trying to figure out and working with its own polity and economy, while it has also been a part of a process connected to what was orchestrated in conjunction with Northern Ireland and the trauma that came from the Troubles. Specifically, the fact that the Troubles were used as a means by which other people could avail themselves of the data associated with what occurred for a variety of other processes. And at that time, the sort of social welfare system that was set up also had implications in how people allowed for not only people that were Irish, but also people that were of Irish descent to have to wear around a particular kind of descriptor, a particular understanding of what was considered to be racially appropriate, ethnically appropriate, as an expression of your heritage, especially white heritage as somebody of Irish descent. And far too often, what I've seen in my life, literally, is that very spiritually powerful Irish women are supposed to be identified as having some sort of mental illness so that their shamanic and other spiritual capabilities can be pathologized while they are harvested for their DNA. And their DNA is allowed to be recapitulated and spliced up and used. It is as if the Irish have genetically invested in groups of people all over the planet. But because we don't acknowledge what actually happens and how it actually happens, we are years down the road. And we are in the situation we are in with COVID-19, and there is not a lot of clarity. I'm saying this now because it's something that is coming up at this point in time. And I just want to acknowledge that for myself. You didn't have to be this way. And unfortunately, because it is this way, there are possibilities that are no longer available. And I know that. But at the same time, even if I had to deal for myself with what ended up happening, with accepting the circumstances and making the decision I did, it is not appropriate that other people, and entire other legacies of people, should also be allowed to be put into this situation in completely contrived and racist manners. You see, the problem is this. Somebody took out a bond. And when that bond came due, somehow, magically, a boy and a girl that were on that bond met each other at that time. They had sex. She got pregnant. Just in time for the payout. She had an abortion. And that is also what they did to Ireland. And I saw it. And they're trying to do that to more and more and more people around the world right now. And it's not acceptable. If you needed me to make a contribution, I already did. You have no right to continue murdering members of my family. You had no right to murder my grandfather. You had no right to murder my mother. You had no right to go after my sister and my nieces and nephews like you did. You specifically had no right to try to put them into some completely contrived, racialized scenario because of what you allege is their genetic indications. That's just my personal family. That's just my personal biological family. You had no right to do that to me, and you had no right to do that to anybody else. If you think that you are part of some sort of revolutionary movement where you are getting retribution by harvesting the DNA of people from particular phenotypes or genotypes, I'm here to say you're incorrect because you already got my blood. You understand? You already got my fucking blood. It's probably running through you right fucking now. You probably literally have my DNA running through your veins right fucking now. How much longer do you think you're going to ignore your blood calling? You're not allowed to do this. You've done enough. Stop.